Well, hello friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we're going to talk about the Telecaster Thinline. We're going to talk about how it came about. We're going to talk about the version 1, and then we're going to talk about how totally different the version 2 is, like this, which of course has the wide range humbuckers and bullet truss rod and 3-bolt neck and a non-tremolo strat bridge. We're going to talk about all those things and why the wide range pickup sounds so different than a Gibson humbucker, and it's really important, and it's pretty obvious when you look at the way they're constructed. Yeah, we're going to talk about the Thinline through the years, and its original run from 68 through 78, and then how it kind of gained popularity through the years. Some of the guys that played them, and we're just going to have fun. All right, so while you're thinking about it, if you haven't done it already and you've been enjoying the show, then please hit subscribe. Also, I really appreciate you hitting the thumbs up because that just helps us out. Also, support is always welcome. There's Patreon links in the description, also links to AskZach.com where you can go to the store and you can find things like this amp schematic shirt, or there's just good old tip jar information, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. All right, let's dive in. So Fender started having issues with heavy Telecaster bodies in 1967. Now, was that an issue with the bean counters that weren't speccing lightweight ash? Were they going to have to pay more for that? Who knows? But regardless, they had heavy ash that they didn't want to use for bodies because it was just too heavy. So the guys thought, well, what if we routed out some of the wood underneath the pickguard? So that's what they did, because it was something that could easily be done and would be hidden. So this is a 67 Tele. It's not routed underneath the pickguard, but what they did was they just, when they were, initially doing the routes, they routed out this whole area underneath the pickguard and just left a little area where they could attach the pickup. And what they found was that it was not enough, wood removal to really be of any type of significant, weight loss for the guitar. So they knew that they had to, they were going to have to do some retooling, and they were going to have to come out with a new model because there just wasn't enough that could be done on this guitar without changing the design. So the decision was made to make a Thinline Telecaster. So, of course, Thinline guitars were popular with, Gibson. And so what they decided, like the 335. So they decided to put an F-hole on it. And then they made the body just a touch thinner for a reason. But first, they routed out an area right here, quite large, and then an area here and an area here. Then, to cover it up, they took a thin piece of wood shaped like a Telecaster, and they put it on there and glued it on. I guess sometimes they call it, you'd call it a veneer or a fillet, something like that. And of course, from the top, they did their normal routing, and then they routed out an F-hole up here. But otherwise, it was kind of a normal Telecaster. It had the same bridge, same electronics. It lost the plate. So instead, the controls were mounted on a pickguard, and of course it got an elongated pickguard that was Pearloid. Another interesting feature was this was the first Telecaster where the neck pickup was mounted to the pickguard and not the body. So all Telecaster neck pickups had all been mounted to the body before this, and so this was the first time Fender experimented with that, and they would use it later on with the American Standard series and such. The bodies were made from ash or mahogany, and but the mahogany are much less common. They're out there, and normally they were in a natural finish. And of course, you can really see the difference between the mahogany and the ash. Early '68 models would have had a maple cap neck, meaning no skunk stripe on the back because it was a two-piece neck, or of course rosewood board, which is much less common. You see many more of the maple caps on the early Thinlines. Of course, the earliest models, would probably have more of a lacquer finish on body and neck, and then of course by late '68, you have the switch over to pretty much all poly, And of course, the loss of the cloth-covered wires that were in early '68, and you start seeing plastic insulation covering on there. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So the price of a standard Telecaster in 1968 was $229. Now, taking inflation into account, that'd be like $2,000 in today's money. This is 2022 when I'm shooting this video. The Thinline was $319, which, taking inflation into account, was $2,700. So you paid a $700 upcharge for a body that was partially hollowed out and had a back plate, basically, a back fillet of wood that was covering up where they did the routings, and it had, of course, a Pearloid pickguard. That's a huge upcharge. I'm sure there was more labor involved in doing that, but yeah, it was interesting that Fender did that. That was kind of savvy on their part. And then if anyone ever complained about Telecaster being heavy, well, it's like, well, here, let us show you our new Telecaster Thinline. It's it's only a little bit more. Well, of course, in today's money, $700, and back then it would have been about $90, which would have been a lot of money. So, yeah, so the guitar doesn't really, in '68, then you go into '69. '69, you get maple necks come back. So that's when you have, skunk stripes, come back. 70, the guitar is pretty much the same. 71, 70 and 71, pretty much the same till late 71. And that's when you get version 2. And this is a completely different guitar. And the heart of it are the wide range pickups. So the wide range pickups came about as Fender had hired Seth Lover away from Gibson. So Seth Lover had designed the original humbucker for Gibson back in the mid-50s, and also he had designed other pickups and amps and other designs for Gibson as one of their main engineers. So they hired him away, and it's been speculated that the reason Fender hired him was they wanted him to make a Gibson humbucker for them, basically a copy, because the patent was supposedly coming to an end. But I'm not sure whether that is true or not, but we do know that Seth Lover made a very different pickup. It is very different in sound, and it's very different in construction. So here's where we need to talk about humbucker construction so you can understand the huge difference between a Gibson humbucker and a Fender wide range humbucker. So let's talk about the Gibson pickup first. So a Gibson humbucker has pole pieces, has 12 pole pieces that are metal. They're not magnets. And then it has the 2 bobbins, and then underneath it has a bar magnet. Okay? The wide range Fender humbucker, it has pole pieces that are also magnets. Okay, so there's no bar magnet underneath it because the pole pieces are the magnets. And that's because that's what Fender always did. Leo Fender's guitars they always had the pole pieces were the magnets. He didn't have a separate magnet underneath it, and they weren't adjustable. So this one had the pole pieces were the magnets. Very different. Also, they wanted them to be adjustable, unlike other Fender pickups. They wanted them, they wanted the pole pieces to be adjustable, which meant that the magnets had to be threaded so that you could, adjust them up and down. Well, that immediately also changed the type of magnet that was used, because they couldn't use a regular Alnico 2 or Alnico 5 or 3 or whatever Gibson was using at that point. And they had to use a new, magnet that was called Kunif. And so this was a combination of copper and nickel and kind of a ferrite, ceramic magnet. And that is, that was the only one that could be threaded. And so that's why they used it. So that's another, big contributor to a very different sound. Also, you had a lot more windings on the bobbins, and so the wide range pickups, will measure in the 10K to 11K range, while your standard Gibson humbucker would have been in the 7 to 8, sometimes into the 9K range. So they were that reading doesn't always measure into output, but yet these are somewhat loud pickups. They are they certainly have more output than your standard Fender single coil. All right. So that was part of it with the Thinline too, was the humbuckers. Of course, also you have the switch away from the Telecaster bridge, which is a big part of the Telecaster bridge pickup sound is the fact that it's a single coil, two, it's mounted in the bridge, and there's an interaction there that's an important part of the Telecaster sound. Well, by taking that away, and also mounting it to the pickguard instead of into the wood or something else, all those things change it. Now here you have a non-tremolo Strat bridge. So big change in tone. Big change with hardware, big change with the pickups. You also, you have a change in this made for an easier sub-assembly at the factory. So now you could have someone sitting there with the pickguard, and they could be mounting pickups, mounting the volume and tone controls and the selector switch. They could solder it all together, and then it could be slapped into the guitar, down the line. While we're at it, now the Telecaster book, the old Bible that came out in around 90, it says that these guitars had 250K pots. But I have yet to find one that has 250K pots. All of them have 1 meg pots, which were what Fender was using in the regular Telecasters of the era. So if you have an original Thinline from the 70s, a Thinline 2 with the wide range pickups, and it has 250K pots, please comment below or send me a note. So then construction-wise, there were some other changes. And so this was the first Fender guitar to get the wide range pickups. And then this was also part of the changeover in late 71, where you get the addition of the 3-bolt micro tilt, neck adjustment, and you get the bullet truss rod. And of course, the reason this is called bullet truss rod is because it looks like a bullet end right here. Now, this was a good design because this allows you to adjust the truss rod without taking the neck off like you had to do on vintage guitars, on on standard Telecasters. Also, you could adjust neck angle with the micro tilt. So you could just loosen these screws and you could put in an Allen wrench in there, and you could turn that, tighten it, and what it would do is it would raise up above the wood. And it was just like putting a shim in the neck back in the old days. So you'll find a lot of old Fenders where if you take the neck off, you'll find a little piece of paper or plastic or maybe even a piece of wood that's put in the neck pocket down close, closer to the bridge. And what they're doing is they're changing the neck angle. They're kind of angling it downward. And that was a fairly common thing. Not all Fender guitars have that, but quite a few of them do. Well, now they could adjust that, at setup in the factory without having to take the guitar apart. Now all of a sudden it was all there. And the truss rod, it's adjustable right here. Neck doesn't have to be removed. So there were some really nice features on the guitar, and of course this guitar sounded very, very different than the other Telecaster. Let's talk about colors and finishes and stuff. Of course, originally it was offered in ash or mahogany, but by the time the 2 series with the wide range is out, you don't really see many mahogany bodies. They're out there, but there's just not very many. Most of them are ash. Finish-wise, of course, natural is the biggest one that you'll see. You will see some black ones, some sunburst ones, and some white ones. Every once in a while, there'll be some oddball custom colored one, but those are exceptionally rare. Most of the time, the pickguard is this white Pearloid, but you will see some that have just a white guard that's 3-ply instead of a 4-ply like this. So, yeah. And so these guitars, during the era that they were made, were not incredibly popular. So the Series 1 there was like footage of like Curtis Mayfield playing the first version of the Thinline, but the second version really doesn't get played a whole lot. I remember seeing footage of Conway Twitty playing one in the 70s, with his big hair and singing "Bum Bum Bum." You've never been this far before, but you don't see a whole lot of guys playing Thinline 2s, especially in the 1970s. So I guess it was not a very popular model, because also Fender removed it from the line in late 78, early 79. The guitar's gone. So it just went away. So it's kind of sad, but the guitar kind of lived on. So Fender Japan made a version of it, part of their JV series, in the early 1980s. That's pretty rare, but they are out there. Also, there were copies made by other companies. Greco made a really cool copy under their Spacey Sound, telecopies that is a really good Thinline 2 series, and the pickups are a little fatter sounding. And I have to give credit to Duke Levine, who is a friend of the show, that has one, and even been using his Greco Spacey Sound on the road with Bonnie Raitt. And he likes it because the pickups are a little fatter sounding than a regular vintage Thinline. So, yeah. But yeah, other players kind of picked up on this guitar later on. So Johnny Lang, Tab Benoit, the guitarist with, Coldplay and different, kind of more alternative, maybe Radiohead and some other guys, played these at different times. But yeah, it kind of continued on in reissues, and of course the original models, it's always one of those things where, kind of the outliers, the punk guys, the guys that are doing something different that don't have much money. Those are the guys that pick up on these, Fender or other models that are less popular, and then they kind of popularize them. So, just like the new wave guys like Elvis Costello, played Jazz Masters and Jaguars and stuff like that, and they started making them popular again. And so then some of the blues cats and the, kind of more experimental rock dudes started playing these guys and started making these, popular again. This guitar, this is a brand spanking new, right from the factory, vintage 2 series 72 Thinline from Fender. So I really had a hard time. I looked and looked for one that I could borrow from a friend or a store here in town, and I could not track one down. And I really didn't want to try to have somebody ship a guitar to me. So Fender was kind enough to send this to me, and this is a cool guitar. And I think one of the kind of cool and fun features that they did on this, and most people won't get this right away, but if you look, there is toner on the headstock alone, and the reason is that in the 70s, and actually starting in the late 60s. Fender changed the way they put their logos on. And so if you look at 70s Fenders, the headstock is always darker than the rest of the guitar. Well, in most cases. And the reason that is that the guitar was pretty much completely poly. And after the neck was finished, they would put the logo on. And then after the logo was put on, they would just spray a light coat of lacquer. And so what would happen is that coat of lacquer would age differently than the poly. And it would create this look. And so Fender, had kind of a little fun tip of the hat to the old guitars, in that they put a toner on there. So brand new, it's already darker than the rest of the neck. So kind of a fun thing. Well, I'm gonna play a little bit of it now for you, since all I've done is talk about it. I'm gonna play it through my old deluxe reverb. You get to hear that clean. I'll go through the different pickups and just play that for you. appreciate you watching the show today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.